And we are live. Welcome to Altered Moments. I'm Kimberly Stevens, and I'm really excited that you're here today. You may know that an altered moment is that divine moment when God shows up into our lives and we're never the same ever again. And for the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about stories of altered moments from some of my friends. And it was suggested that I share some of my own altered moments since my book, Altered Finding Hope Through Grit and Gratitude, is what actually inspired this show, Altered Moments. So if you're not familiar with my book, you can read my full story in my book. But today we're going to focus on one little moment that meant a lot. And it's my intention that hearing this story would inspire somebody to see that God is in the details. Jesus cares about everything that we care about, whether it seems small or big. And wait till you hear the story about my yellow rose. Last weekend, I was in San Antonio and I had been talking to some friends, and they let me know that they thought I should share some of my own altered moments. And I was hesitant because coming on here and interviewing somebody is very different than coming on a live stream and talking about myself for an entire 30 minutes. And I was very tempted to say no. And as a matter of fact, I did say no for a couple of minutes. And then I thought, well, if I did, what would I share first? And I thought, oh, I could share about the yellow roses. And I thought, no, I'm not up for it. I'm not going to do it. And then I was walking into the church at the Alamo, and right in front of the church, there was a giant wreath of yellow roses. And I knew God was saying to me, Kimberly, you have to do this. So here I am. And starting out with this story, I have to tell you about my son. My son was born in 1991, December 23rd. He was perfect when he was born. He was 7 pounds, 11 ounces, and he had a ton of dark hair. And like I said, he was perfect. He started eating, he was sleeping well. And then all of a sudden, at 6 days, things took a bad turn and we had to rush him into the hospital. I was doing mouth to mouth on him during our drive. He was admitted to the hospital and we were told if he survived 24 hours that he would be all right. Well, he survived 24 hours, but he still wasn't okay. So they started looking for other causes of his issues. And about 3 days later, he was diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder called citrullinemia. He was born with a cycle that processes protein that was deficient in one little teeny tiny enzyme. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to come back from the initial episode and insult to his body. He died when he was 15 days old. And part of me died that day as well. Now, when he was born, I was given yellow roses to celebrate his birth. Yellow was a perfect color. He was a boy. And I cherished those yellow roses. And I cherished the little shoe that held those yellow roses. It was a really cute little baby vase. And those yellow roses were absolutely precious to me. I had dried them and kept them for a very long time. A couple weeks after he died, it was in late January, I decided that I needed something to nurture and I floated the trial balloon by my son's dad that we should get a puppy. And that didn't go so well. So I decided to get a rose bush. Not sure why I thought it would be fun to nurture a prickly rose bush, but given how much those yellow roses had meant to me, I decided to try to grow my own yellow roses. Well, I went to Home Depot and I bought the first yellow rose bush that I saw and planted it. I did everything that I was supposed to. I tried to fertilize in a ring around, and I made sure to only water in the ground and not on the leaves so it wouldn't rot. And I left that rose bush to grow and to grow me yellow roses. Well, unfortunately, that rose bush ended up looking more like Brown's Christmas tree than it ended up looking like the yellow roses that I had gotten in the hospital. And I just noticed Sai's comment, and I just wanted to say, welcome, Sai. I'm glad to see you all the way from France. And Sarah, if you are joining today, I'm really glad to see you as well. Welcome to everybody who is joining us live, and welcome to everyone who listens to this on the replay. So here we are. We're talking about my yellow rose bush that I attempted to plant that looked more like Charlie Brown's Christmas tree than a rose bush. And I didn't know what to do. I took care of it the best that I could, and I left it growing, or so I thought. And as time went on, it looked a little bit more like it was going to die than it was going to thrive. And as my grief progressed and changed over the next few months, those dried yellow roses that I had from the hospital continued to mean something to me. They were my connection to a time when my son was alive. And so I kept hoping that something good would happen with my yellow rose bush. Well, Braden died on January 7th, and the following months were very dark months for me. And when we started approaching the month of May, my heart grew very dark and sad because I didn't know what to do on Mother's Day. I didn't know if the world saw me as a mom. Of course I was a mom. I'd had a baby. He just wasn't here anymore to prove that I was a mom. But on Mother's Day at our church, they always ask mothers to stand. And I didn't know if I stood on Mother's Day, if I would make people uncomfortable because my son had died, or if I should just stand up and acknowledge that my son had been here and that I was indeed his mother. And that was a really, really difficult moment for me. Hi, Anthony. I'm glad to see you. Thanks for joining us. So, on the weeks leading up to Mother's Day, I noticed that my yellow rose bush actually had a bud. And I allowed myself to hope that it would actually bloom one day soon. And it was my little tiny bit of hope for the month of May. And sure enough, God timed the bloom on that rose bush. Hi, Suzanne. Great to see you. Thank you for the hug. On Mother's Day, I went out to check on my rose bush, and right there was the very first bloom from my yellow rose bush. And I sobbed in gratitude as I cut it and I brought it in the house. And I just thanked God for caring about the details, because I felt when I saw that rose, I felt that God was telling me, Kimberly, you are a mother, and I do love you. And I care that Mother's Day is a hard day for you. Well, that yellow rose carried me through May, and there were no more blooms on that rose bush. As I mentioned, it was a little bit of a Charlie Brown until I noticed a bloom that was hiding underneath some of the leaves. And the second rose bloomed the night before Father's Day. I cut the rose and I put it in the refrigerator. And on Father's Day, when I took that rose out and gave it to Braden's dad, we both just looked at each other and sobbed and thanked God again for caring about the details that we cared about. He cared about our hearts enough to acknowledge us in a heavenly way that we were indeed Braden's parents. Now, that rose bush went on to survive, I'm happy to say, but it didn't bloom many more times. And I think I got one or two roses until I was pregnant with my daughter 2 years later. And my due date was November 25th. And about a week before Thanksgiving, I noticed that there was a blossom, a bud on that rose bush. And I remember thinking, as I was 9 months pregnant, oh my gosh, this baby is not going to be born until that rose blooms. Hello to my mom. Thanks for joining. And so I remember thinking, kind of tongue in cheek, I was in a hurry for this baby to be born. Obviously, my belly was growing a lot faster than anything else. And so I thought about tongue in cheek, just taking a hairdryer outside and blowing warm air on the rosebud in order to get it to open so that I could have this baby. I was very excited to have this baby, not only because my belly was so large, but because just a couple of weeks earlier, we had done prenatal testing and we got the all clear that this baby, though she had a 1 in 4 chance of being born with citrullinemia, the disease that killed her brother, she wasn't going to have it. We were told she was all clear. And so I was especially excited to have this baby and meet her. And November 19th came and my water broke and we brought Victoria Faith home from the hospital. And I remember very curiously looking at that rose bush as I walked in my front door with my daughter in my arms and thinking, how strange that it didn't bloom. Well, 3 days later, hi, Mrs. C. Thank you so much for joining. 3 days later, after Tori was born, we got a phone call telling us that the backup test that they had done in the hospital did not show good news for Tori, and that she indeed did have citrullinemia, the disease that didn't go so well for us the first time. And I remember thinking that it was a death sentence. And we drove to the hospital. We got her IV started, and we went through a process where we spent 11 days in the hospital with Tori. The doctors told us when she was admitted that they didn't expect her to live a week. And frankly, I didn't either. They did some backup testing to confirm the backup testing, and that secondary backup testing did show and confirm that Tori had citrullinemia. I was in the pumping room when those tests came back, and I had decided when I got the news to acquiesce and to let Tori go and to surrender because we did not have a good outcome with citrullinemia the first time. Well, when my pastor's wife heard me say those words, she grabbed me by the shoulders. She looked me in the eyes and she said, Kimberly, You can't give up on this child. This is not Braden. This is Victoria Faith. And at that moment, I knew that I had to fight for her. And as I said, we spent 11 days with her in the hospital. We learned how to make special formula for her that wouldn't overload her system. We learned how to take care of her, essentially, and how we would need to monitor her going forward. And we were discharged from the hospital. And we were discharged from the hospital with hope. And the day that she was discharged from the hospital the second time, I walked into my home and I walked right past a brand new yellow rose from that rose bush. It was a miracle. And again, I clipped that rose and I brought it in the house so that I could enjoy the miracle of God caring about the details of my life. And it was that day, that time, where I started looking to yellow roses to be a sign from God in my life that He had my back and that He was going to carry me going forward. And there have been, since that day back in 1993, there have been more times than I can say where yellow roses have appeared in my life. Just like last weekend when I was going into the church in San Antonio, and God gave me an entire wreath of yellow roses to encourage me to share this story today on this live stream. Every year on my son's birthday, December 23rd, my daughter and my mom and my son give me yellow roses to remember Braden. Every year on January 7th, somehow I always end up getting yellow roses as well. That's the anniversary of his death. I remember one particular January 7th when I was living in Chicago. The rose selection in Chicago back in the early 2000s wasn't all that great in January. And I went in search of yellow roses and I couldn't find them. And I was in the grocery store and literally crying. I had gone to the florist outside my house earlier that day looking for yellow roses, and they didn't have any. Actually, they did have some, but they couldn't sell them to me because someone had already purchased them. And then I went looking for them at the grocery store and another grocery store, and there were no yellow roses in Evanston, Illinois that day. And I went home and I literally was crying in the car. And when I walked in my door, I walked into a huge bouquet of yellow roses. And those darn roses that the florist hadn't been able to sell me because someone else had been purchased by my children for me for that day. And it was just an absolutely precious moment that God was meeting my needs and loving on my heart through the love of my children on that day. There are so many yellow rose stories that I could tell you. And I remember posting one particular Mother's Day about a rose that was blooming right outside my front door on my neighbor's rose bush. Just a beautiful, simple yellow rose. And I posted that picture on Facebook. And my friend Margie, if you're on here, nice special call out to you. My friend Margie made a comment on that post, and her comment struck me, and I've never forgotten it. And she said, "It's not just that God gives me the gift of yellow roses. It's that I have eyes to see those yellow roses, and I have a heart to receive the love that the Lord is showing me through those yellow roses." And I never thought about it that way, that God gives us gifts every day, and we have a responsibility to actually see them. And that actually ties everything up so perfectly about altered moments and altered finding hope through grit and gratitude to never give up. And the whole purpose for me wanting to do this and share my story is that God is alive and well in the world today. He cares about us, He cares about what we care about. And He shows us that in so many ways. And Romans tells us that God is alive and we can see Him in creation and we can see Him everywhere if we will just take a moment to see Him and acknowledge Him. And so that's my hope by sharing this story, that if you need a yellow rose moment, I know it's there for you. I know it's there in your life. And I would encourage you to have a conversation with God wherever you are right now and ask Him to show you that He is alive and well and that He is working in your life today and every day. And that's my altered moment about yellow roses. I want to just tell you all, thank you so much for being here today. Suzanne, I know you knew that today was going to be hard for me because I was going to be speaking for the first time by myself on this live stream. So thank you so much for being here. If you know anyone Kyle, thank you so much for being here. If you know anybody who is struggling with not being able to see God working in their life, please share this story with them. And please challenge them to ask God to give them eyes to see and ears to hear, because He is alive and well, and He will change their life too by caring about the little tiny details that we think nobody sees or understands. Well, let me talk about Tuesday. We have a really special guest. I got to hear his story on Saturday this last week when I was in Texas. And I was so excited after I heard his story. I don't even think he was off the stage for 5 seconds before I grabbed him and said, "You need to come on my podcast." So his name is Jared. He's going to be here Tuesday at 1 p.m. So I hope you'll all join me for that. And in the meantime, if you want to hear more altered moments from my book, you can find my book on Amazon or at kimberlyjstevens.com. And if you're not a reader and you're looking for something to inspire you to see God and to remain hopeful, you can download a playlist off of my website, which is 4.5 hours of music that point you to the hope that we can only find in our Lord. My website again is I can talk. I really can. My website again is kimberlyjstevens.com. And until Tuesday, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you again for joining me, whether it was live or on the replay. And please share this out to anyone you know who could use a yellow rose in their life. Until Tuesday, take care.